The Vietnam War and the Watergate Scandal remain two of the most tumultuous and consequential chapters in American history. They were deeply intertwined, each casting a long shadow on the nation's psyche and shaping its future. The Vietnam War, a protracted and bloody conflict in Southeast Asia, deeply divided the American people, pitting generation against generation and testing the very fabric of society. Watergate, a political scandal of unprecedented proportions, shook the foundations of American democracy, revealing a web of corruption and deceit at the highest levels of government. These twin crises of the 1960s and 1970s left an indelible mark on the American consciousness. They forced a reassessment of America's role in the world, its commitment to democratic principles, and the delicate balance between national security and individual liberties. The scars of Vietnam and the cynicism engendered by Watergate continue to resonate, reminding us of the fragility of trust, the importance of accountability, and the enduring power of truth. The United States' involvement in Vietnam did not begin in a vacuum. It was, in many ways, a consequence of the broader context of the Cold War, a global ideological struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The domino theory, which posited that the fall of one country to communism would inevitably lead to the fall of its neighbors, held considerable sway in American foreign policy circles. Vietnam, a former French colony, became a focal point in this struggle. Following the defeat of the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the country was divided into Communist North Vietnam and the US-backed Republic of Vietnam in the south. The United States, fearing the spread of communism throughout Southeast Asia, gradually increased its military and economic assistance to South Vietnam. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, deeply suspicious of communist intentions, committed American military advisors to train and support the South Vietnamese army. His successor, John F. Kennedy, increased the number of advisors and authorized the use of American helicopters in combat operations. However, it was under President Lyndon B. Johnson that the United States' involvement in Vietnam escalated dramatically. Johnson, determined to prevent what he saw as a communist takeover of South Vietnam, secured congressional approval for the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964. This resolution, passed in the wake of a reported attack on American warships in the Gulf of Tonkin, granted Johnson broad authority to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964 proved to be a pivotal moment in the Vietnam War, marking a significant escalation of American involvement. The incident involved two alleged attacks on U.S. Navy destroyers, the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy, by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. While the first attack was widely reported and led to the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the second attack, which occurred the following night, remains shrouded in controversy. Evidence suggests that the second attack may not have happened at all, or at least was greatly exaggerated by the Johnson administration. The administration, eager to secure congressional authorization for a more forceful response to North Vietnamese aggression, used the incident to justify a significant increase in American military presence in Vietnam. Following the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the Johnson administration launched Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam. American ground troops were also deployed in larger numbers, engaging in search and destroy missions against Viet Cong guerrillas in the south. The war escalated rapidly, with American casualties mounting and the conflict spreading to neighboring Laos and Cambodia. The Gulf of Tonkin incident and the subsequent escalation of American involvement marked a turning point in the Vietnam War. It transformed what had been a limited Cold War proxy conflict into a full-blown American war, with far-reaching consequences for both the United States and Southeast Asia. Section 4. The Tet Offensive, a nation's resolve tested. The Tet Offensive, launched by the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong in late January 1968, was a turning point in the Vietnam War, shattering the illusion of American progress and deeply dividing public opinion at home. The offensive, named after the Vietnamese Lunar New Year holiday of Tet, involved a series of coordinated attacks on over 100 cities and towns across South Vietnam, including the capital, Saigon. While the offensive was ultimately a military defeat for the Communists, it proved to be a strategic victory, exposing the resilience of the North Vietnamese and undermining American public support for the war. The Tet Offensive revealed the limitations of American military power and the determination of the North Vietnamese to fight on despite heavy losses. The ferocity of the fighting, broadcast into American living rooms on the nightly news, shocked and dismayed many Americans who had been led to believe that the war was being won. The Tet Offensive also fueled anti-war sentiment, leading to a growing chorus of voices calling for an end to American involvement in Vietnam. The media coverage of the Tet Offensive, particularly the iconic image of a North Vietnamese soldier being executed in Saigon, galvanized public opinion against the war. The credibility gap between the Johnson administration's optimistic assessments of the war and the grim reality on the ground widened considerably, further eroding public trust. Section 5. A Generation in Revolt, the Anti-War Movement and the Counterculture. As the Vietnam War escalated, a powerful anti-war movement emerged in the United States, challenging the moral and political justifications for the conflict. The movement, which drew support from a diverse coalition of students, activists, intellectuals, and artists, grew increasingly vocal and influential as the war dragged on. Anti-war protests, ranging from teach-ins and demonstrations to marches and acts of civil disobedience, became a regular occurrence on college campuses and in major cities across the country. The movement gave voice to a generation that questioned the Cold War consensus and the morality of American interventionism. The anti-war movement was closely intertwined with the counterculture of the 1960s, a broader social and cultural movement that rejected traditional values and embraced alternative lifestyles, music, and forms of expression. The counterculture, with its emphasis on peace, love, and individual freedom, provided a fertile ground for anti-war sentiment to flourish. The anti-war movement and the counterculture, while not monolithic, shared a deep skepticism of authority and a commitment to social justice. They challenged the status quo, questioned traditional norms, and demanded an end to the war in Vietnam. Their activism and dissent had a profound impact on American society, contributing to a broader re-examination of social values and political priorities. Section 6. Nixon's Gambit Vietnamization, Détente, and the Secret Bombings. Richard Nixon came to office in 1969 pledging to end the Vietnam War. His strategy, known as Vietnamization, aimed to gradually withdraw American troops from Vietnam while simultaneously strengthening the South Vietnamese military to fight on their own. Nixon also pursued a policy of détente with the Soviet Union and China, hoping to reduce Cold War tensions and create a more favorable environment for a negotiated settlement in Vietnam. However, Nixon's pursuit of peace was accompanied by a significant escalation of the war in other areas. In an effort to cut off North Vietnamese supply lines and weaken the communist insurgency in South Vietnam, Nixon authorized a secret bombing campaign against suspected communist sanctuaries in Cambodia and Laos. These bombings, kept hidden from the American public and Congress, resulted in widespread destruction and civilian casualties, destabilizing the region and further widening the war. Nixon's decision to expand the war into Cambodia provoked outrage among many Americans, who saw it as a betrayal of his promise to end the conflict. The bombings also led to increased anti-war protests and further eroded public trust in the government. The My Lai massacre, which occurred in 1968 but was not widely reported until 1969, further fueled public outrage and turned public opinion even more strongly against the war. Nixon's Vietnamization policy, while ultimately leading to the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam, did not achieve its goal of securing a lasting peace. The South Vietnamese government, weakened by corruption and internal divisions, proved unable to withstand the North Vietnamese offensive in 1975, leading to the fall of Saigon and the reunification of Vietnam under communist rule.